We are so excited to be partnering with Walmart's Black and Unlimited on these very special episodes as we head into Black History Month. Street You Grew Up On is a special place where we come together to unfold our common humanity and reaffirm that every person is the lead character in the story of their own lives. And it all starts on the street they grew up on, the homes, the communities, the worlds. Walmart's Black and Unlimited platform is all about supercharging the unlimited potential of Black people and our communities, not only for Black History Month, but every day. I'm so excited for you to hear from some of our guests, Black artists and entrepreneurs and creators, about the communities that supercharged them into being the inspirations that they are today. So here we go.
Once upon a time we was doing too much. Had our first crush, then we lost touch. Seems like the days fly by in the blink of an eye, and we're grown up just like that. But as much as we try to replay and rewind, it don't go like that.
Oh my God! Today's guest on Street You Grew Up On is one of the most talented people I have ever met in my entire life. He's one of very few EGOT winners in the world, which means that he has an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony. He's an incredible singer and songwriter and actor and producer and really human being. He's a delight, and I'm so excited to talk to him about the street that he grew up on. Please welcome John Legend.
Hello, Kerry. How are you?
Oh, it's so good to see you. So I want to get started by learning the name of the street you grew up on by asking you what your sexy alter ego porn name is. So
I've done this exercise before.
yes, tell me the name of your first pet and the street you grew up on.
Our first pet was named Pepper.
Oh, this is already good. This is already good.
Which is wild because my mother-in-law's nickname is Pepper as well. So
okay.
My porn name is now my mother-in-law's name, so that's a little
weird.
And my street that I grew up on is Lexington Avenue, so I'm Pepper Lexington.
That's kind of great. That character feels like high class, Pepper Lexington. What was the house? Did you grow up in a house or an apartment? Where did you grow up on Lexington?
I grew up in a house. It was a 4-bedroom house, 2 stories with a basement. My grandfather had raised my mother and some of her siblings at this house.
Wow.
And then eventually my grandfather sold it to my parents, and then my parents moved in.
Wow. And we're in Ohio, yes?
Yes, Springfield, Ohio. It's Western Ohio. It's a town of about 70,000 and shrinking. It's one of those cities whose population is going down. A lot of the workers are doing, factory jobs. My father was an auto worker at a truck building factory. So they built big semi-trucks, big rigs, and he was on the assembly line. And then my mother stayed at home with us.
And who lived in the house? How many siblings? Did any of your grandparents live with you, or who was there?
It was just us. It was our nuclear family, my mother and father, and I have 3 siblings. I have an older brother named Ron, I have a younger brother named Vaughn, and I have a younger sister named Phyllis. Both of my parents are very creative. My dad, in addition to working at the truck factory, would make clothes. My mother made clothes and altered clothes for our neighbors and friends. My dad also is a great artist, so he would draw portraits of people with paint and with pencil. And my mother also was the choir director at my church and sang beautifully and still does. And then my father sings, plays the drums, and was a deacon at my church as well.
Wow, it's such a creative, spiritual home.
Yes, very much so.
Was there a ton of music in your home then? Were you just always listening to music, and was it always kind of faith-based music, or was it other kinds of secular music as well?
So it was mostly faith-based music, especially early on. My church tradition is the Pentecostal church, which is a very vibrant church service, very energetic, but it's also quite a fundamentalist sect of Protestantism. It was pretty strict when it came to social behaviors. They didn't like us going to the movies, listening to secular music. They didn't like skirts above the knees. They didn't like jewelry and makeup. up. There were a lot of what you would call socially conservative views, despite the fact that the church was kind of fun and energetic and rowdier than a lot of churches. And so when I was a kid, we were kind of sheltered from pop culture in a lot of ways. We were homeschooled for a while during the earlier part of our schooling. So I didn't go to a public school until I was 11 years old.
Wow. So Lexington Avenue was really, you grew up there not just in the evenings and weekends. I mean, you were there every day, all day.
So we were around my parents and my cousins who lived around the corner. We had cousins that lived around one side of the block and then cousins who lived around the other side of the block. So we had a lot of family around. And then we spent a lot of time at church. And I grew up raised in that tradition and surrounded by extended family, but not around a bunch of other kids, like most kids would at school.
So were there kids in your neighborhood that you were able to hang out
Yes.
with, or did you mostly just hang out with your cousins?
So a lot was my cousins, but we had other kids in the neighborhood. It was a pretty young neighborhood, lots of families with kids. We would play football and basketball with them in people's backyards and schoolyards. We definitely weren't completely sheltered from the outside world, outside of our family, but we didn't go to school with them until I was in 8th grade.
So what were some of the other sounds in your house other than kind of church music? Do you remember any other sounds?
So very little outside of gospel music until maybe like I was 10 or 11. Eventually my parents got divorced and things started to kind of open up. And, I think partly because of the age we were reaching, but also once your parents get divorced, some of the rules get thrown out the window. They're not as strict anymore. And my dad grew up on Motown, the Temptations and Smokey and the Miracles. And to the extent that my dad exposed me to secular music, a lot of it was that music from his generation. And they were the sound of America with those classic Motown hits. My dad would sing, "I've got sunshine on a cloudy day." He would go around and sing that to my mother all the time. And so we grew up with that tradition as well.
Talk to me about the smells in your house. Like what were some of the scents? What takes you back to Lexington Avenue?
Neither of my parents were great cooks. My mom was a decent cook, and my dad didn't really cook. And we kind of wanted to help cook a lot of times. So especially
So
me.
that it would be better?
No, I loved food and I wanted to learn about food, but my mom wasn't I'm married to basically
One
a
of
chef
the
now.
most incredible chefs in the world. Yeah.
I think when you're trying to balance everything, you don't have a lot of help around the house, and you have 4 kids, you just kind of do what you need to do to get by. And so our meals were simpler then. So we would have hamburger helper, or we'd have, simple like spaghetti and meat sauce, or Kraft mac and cheese, quick meals that parents can make when they have lots of things going on around the house.
So do you have a taste for those nostalgic foods like hamburger helper and Kraft macaroni and cheese? Like, do you like those things? Do they remind you of home, or do you kind of gravitate more toward Chrissy's excellence in the kitchen?
I gravitate more towards the finer things now, but my kids, they want Kraft, I make a good baked mac and cheese, like old school soul food style.
Yeah.
And they'd much rather have Kraft.
Same in my house. Same in my house. It's so crazy. Did you share a room, or did you have your own room?
We shared a room, so all 3 boys lived in the same room, and then my sister got her own room.
Wow. What was that like? Did you have your own space in the room, or were there bunk beds? Did you have stuff hanging on the wall?
We had bunk beds, so me and my younger brother slept in the bunk bed, and then my older brother got a single twin. We played together all the time. We wrestled, we played football, we played basketball. We did everything together, and so we didn't have this expectation of any privacy.
Everyday actions can make everything change. Visit walmart.com/blackandunlimited to learn more.
Do you think you're closer because you shared a room all those years?
And we're still all pretty close, and my older brother's on the road with me all the time, and he lives here in Los Angeles, and he cuts my hair and designs some of my merch. So we're together a lot. And what we haven't gotten to was my parents skipped me a couple grades, and I was 2 years younger than my classmates, including my brother. So my older brother, 2 years older than me, was in the same class as me, and
Wow.
all of my peers were in the same class as me. So my older brother's always been kind of protective of me and wanted to take care of me, and I think he's still doing that.
Was that hard for you to be around kids that were developmentally, maybe not intellectually, but developmentally more advanced?
Yes, it was hard. I would not recommend it. I think it's hard socially and developmentally. There's just so much that happens in those years in your life, and so much advancement and maturity that comes. And even though I was very studious and very precocious, socially I was not very developed, and I was super shy because of that.
It's interesting for me to hear you talk about being shy because I know what a phenomenal entertainer you are. I've been lucky enough to see you live a few times, and you seem so comfortable up there. When did you find music for yourself? I mean, I know you had it in the church, but when did you find it as a vehicle for you to kind of present yourself to the world?
Well, I started singing in church when I was about 6 or 7. I would go to choir rehearsal with my mother even before I was allowed to sing in the choir, and I would just beg for them to let me sing in the choir, and they finally let me when I was 7.
Really?
Yes. When it came to piano, we had a piano at home. We had a drum kit at home. My older brother was taking piano lessons, but he decided he wanted to switch to the drums. And I told my parents, well, I really want to take piano lessons. So I started taking piano lessons when I was about 4 years old. And I loved music from that early age. I wanted to try it. I wanted to do it. I wanted to perform it. I was a little shy socially during that time, but something about being on stage just made me open up. It made it easier for me to introduce myself on stage to a crowd than it was to introduce myself one-on-one to individuals.
And were you great right away? Like, when you started playing at 4, was everybody like, oh, that we have a prodigy on our hands? You know, like, was there an innate talent, or do you think it's that you started so early and you worked really hard at it?
Anything you do when you're 4, 5, or 6, everyone's gonna be like, "Oh, it's so cute. That's great." But eventually, I could tell that I stood out. As a vocalist, I was learning to play piano with a degree of virtuosity that most of my peers weren't, even people that were taking lessons from the same, instructor or whatever. And, I start to notice, people really like what I'm doing, and I stand out. I'm better than most of my peers around me at this.
When did songwriting start for you?
It started really in church. Whenever a kid who loves music and is performing a lot has that opportunity to perform, at some point you probably want to control what you perform and write your own material. And at some point I was just like, oh, well, I want to sing something else. I want to try something new, and I'm going to write it myself instead of, just covering songs that already exist.
Wow. Do you remember any of the first songs you ever wrote?
Yeah, I wrote songs for my choir. I wrote one called Soon and Very Soon, and I wrote songs for girls that I was attracted to and was, trying to hit on.
Of course you did.
Of course, music has been used for that since the beginning of time, I'm sure.
I'm glad you didn't quit on that, because we all have gotten the benefit of songs you've written for Chrissy. It's like now we're like, thank God he kept doing that. And did you have role models? Like, were there heroes of yours in music?
My first hero was my grandmother. She was our church organist, and she would teach me how to play gospel piano. Her style influenced me more than anyone when it comes to the way I play. But as I got older, Stevie Wonder became a big influence. Marvin Gaye became a big influence. Aretha Franklin, Curtis Mayfield, Smokey Robinson, Nina Simone, Nat King Cole became a big influence.
Your sound is so particular. You have such a unique, soulful sound that I'm sure people say sounds like older than you, right? It like taps into a deep history of our music. Was that always how you approached it because of what you were listening to as a kid, or did you develop that voice?
I think I've always been an old soul, so I enjoyed hanging out with my grandmother and like learning at her feet. I always enjoyed older music, even though I would get into more contemporary music. I'm growing up in the 90s, listening to New Jack Swing and hip
Yeah.
hop during that era. But I always had this older sensibility. So I think even then, I would consult, our ancestors a bit and listen to our ancestors a bit more than most of my peers would.
Do you feel like growing up in the church and kind of being homeschooled gave you more courage to be different in the industry, to be different from what was happening in the 90s with New Jack and hip hop?
Well, I got signed in 2004, so things, kept moving. New Jack Swing had kind of fallen out of favor, and then neo soul was kind of really becoming
Mm.
a big thing. So you were seeing, Erica and D'Angelo and Jill Scott,
Yeah.
and the Roots were behind a lot of that as instrumentalists and producers, helping to make that music and then making their own records as well. And I happened to be in Philadelphia during that time. So right when they're making all this great music and hosting these open mics, I had decided to go to the University of Pennsylvania. I started there in 1995 and graduated from there in 1999. So I happened to be there at a really perfect time to see and experience and be inspired by all this great so-called neo soul that's coming out of Philadelphia during that time. And then I started working with hip hop producers like Kanye and other producers that I met through Lauryn Hill and some of her camp. I think Lauryn Hill, especially that album, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, was very inspiring because it showed this really cool fusion of soul and hip hop that was possible. And then I brought a gospel sensibility to it. She had a little bit of gospel sensibility as well, but I think I was able to summon that gospel sensibility, the classic soul sensibility, hip hop sensibility, and then some of the neo soul sensibility, and then that kind of made the sound that I was ready to create by the time I came out with my first album.
Are there particular refrains or moments in a song you can think of that take you back to those times with your grandmother or being at Lexington Avenue?
There's so many gospel songs that I grew up singing. I just recorded an audible, really kind of an autobiography, a mini autobiography that's a mixture of me telling my story and me singing. And, the song I sang during that performance, which was a live performance at Ronnie Scott's in London, was a song called Take My Hand, Precious Lord.
Oh.
And that's a classic hymn that a lot of our ancestors have sung before us. But I sang that night, and that song reminds me of my grandmother, reminds me of that era of my life.
And what about in the songs that you've written? I wonder if there's places where she shows up in your writing.
Oh, sure. Well, more recently I wrote a song called Free. I wrote that in response to what was happening in Ukraine, but also in response to all the challenges to freedom that we're seeing here in the United States and around the world. And the song was kind of a prayer for more freedom for all of us. And it was very heavily influenced by gospel, by spirituals, by some of the biblical language that I grew up learning. And I start the song saying, "Go down Moses, way down Moses, go down to Egypt land." And as you know, our ancestors, when they were enslaved in this country, they were inspired by the language of Exodus, of Moses leading the Jewish people into liberation from Egypt. We use that story of Exodus as inspiration for our own Exodus from slavery. I intentionally invoked that when I wrote the song Free.
Discover the beauty of Black-led brands because our products and stories are for everyone. Visit walmart.com/blackandunlimited to learn more.
What was it like for you to leave the safe and controlled home life at Lexington Avenue and go into school with lots of other kids and cultures and belief systems? Do you remember what that felt like?
It was culture shock. I was scared. I was nervous. I didn't know very many people. And I just felt so small because, when I went to high school, I was 12 years old.
Oh
And
my gosh, that's crazy to imagine.
most of
Wow.
my peers were 14. So most of the guys and girls were going through puberty already. I'm still not there. I'm like literally a foot shorter than I am now. So I'm like 5'10" and a half now. I was like literally 4'10" and a half then. So I think the common thread through all of this was I was really strong academic performer and I could sing. And again, music was always my way of like opening that door and feeling more connected to other people, and it was like a conversation starter without me having to start the conversation.
Did Lexington Avenue, did that house start to look different to you as you went out into the world and met different kinds of people?
Well, one of the things that affected us was our parents' divorce and, you know, what kind of led to that. So my grandmother died when I was 10 years old. And that actually really traumatically affected my mother. She became distant from us. She became depressed. She brought about the demise of their marriage basically because she became so withdrawn and didn't want to be a mother at that time, didn't want to be
Wow.
a wife at that time, and she became really withdrawn from our family. And eventually my dad just asked her for a divorce because it wasn't working. And so we ended up living with my dad, and my mother was estranged from us, though still living in the same town. So she didn't live with us, but also we barely saw her. And then she fell into deeper depression, started to self-medicate, became addicted to drugs, and we literally lost her for like a decade, where we barely talked to her. She lost a bunch of weight and was, you know, sickly and not healthy and super distant from our family. And it was just a sad thing. And part of the way that I coped with it was I wanted to just stay busy. And so I wanted to stay away from home. I wanted to like do as much at school that I could, like choir, show choir, student council, whatever I could to like kind of distract myself from the pain I was feeling at home and the loss that we were feeling at home. I think I coped by just staying busier.
Do you see that in your life today? Because I think of you as somebody who is such a high achiever. You're so driven. It feels like you have pots on every burner. Do you feel like that became kind of your natural mode to just be doing all the time?
You know, it was for a while, but I don't feel like it is now as much as it used to be. I feel like I'm less busy now than I was back then. In high school, I would like nod off in class because I was so tired from like trying to do everything. Now, like, I'll nap. I'll take the weekend off and just spend it with my family and say, you know, no, I'm not working this weekend. I feel like I allow myself more time off now than I ever did when I was younger.
I remember I had a therapist who said to me once, like, do you think you're a human doing instead of a human being? Because I had that same impulse
That's a
to
good
just like,
that's a good question to ask.
right? Really powerful. I'm glad you brought up two things you just talked about. I have such deep compassion for your family and for your dad in particular to step in and
Yeah.
raise the four of you in the midst of this trauma. And it was interesting to hear you talk about creating time for your family. I do see what a phenomenal dad you are. You're so present. And I wonder, you know, kind of what you learned from your dad on Lexington Avenue about what it means to be a parent.
Well, I always tell my dad he set such a great example for us. He was so loving and so gentle with us, so respectful of us. He cared so much about character and how we treated each other, how we treated other people, about honesty and kindness. And part of our education when we were homeschooled was literally about character education. It was teaching us about what it means to be determined, what it means to be loyal, what it means to be honest, what it means to be compassionate. He was a great example of that.
Was there somebody at school who helped you also realize your talent?
Yeah, I had multiple music teachers. I had it was funny, our gym teacher was actually a really talented musician too when I was in eighth
Wow.
grade. So he would run the talent show and kind of organize it and everything. And then when I got to high school, I was in the show choir, which was led by a woman who was also our senior English teacher, our AP English teacher. So she was this person who loved music. She was leading the drama club as well. Her name was Mrs. Bodie, and she just helped me like come out of my shell, helped me figure out that I actually liked writing and reading, and ended up being an English major in college partly because of her encouragement. And then I had a counselor who was one of the only Black men that worked in my school. So our school was about 1/6 Black, and most of the rest were white. Literally, there were, I think, 2 Black men, maybe 3 Black men who worked as teachers or administrators in the school. This man really showed us the reason why you want more Black men in the schools for Black kids, because he was such a great role model. He took special care of us because he knew where we came from and knew what it was like to be us. And he set a high bar for us and high expectations for us. And because neither of my parents were, college graduates, I needed help thinking about, how to go to college, how to apply, all the things that, you might take for granted if your parents did go to college. I didn't have that. And so he was that person, that mentor that helped me figure all that stuff out.
Do you think about some of these teachers and mentors when you are coaching on The Voice?
I do. I think about it all the time. I think about all the people that poured all this love and support into me and advice into me. I know the value of all that, and I want to try to be as helpful as I can with our artists on The Voice.
If you could have been a coach for yourself, for younger John, what wisdom would you have offered to that younger version of yourself living on Lexington Avenue? Would you have turned your chair around for yourself? That's my first question.
Well, I think early on, I would have needed some help with song selection, which I'm very good at now with my artists. But I think during that time, like I said, I was pretty sheltered, so I didn't really have a good library of songs to pull from. And even being on The Voice has, I think, made me a better artist as far as like thinking about which songs are more effective and which songs work better. The Voice allows me to kind of be a bit of an A&R for my artists. And I think in turn, it helps me think in a more informed way about my own A&R process.
I want to play a game if you can go back to kind of that little version of John living on Lexington Avenue and play like an EGOT inspired game.
Okay.
So I want to know, in your world back then, what the best player musical would have been, what the best song would have been, what the best TV show would have been, and your favorite movie.
Well, I loved The Wiz, so that was like Broadway at its finest as far as I was concerned, based on a story that I already knew, of course, The Wizard of Oz. Seeing a Black version of that with our music and our stars doing it was just thrilling for me. So I would say that was my favorite musical.
What song would have been your favorite song?
So I guess in high school, my favorite thing was Boyz II Men.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, because you know why? It was because not only were they big and making hits at that time, but when I was singing with my friends, these were the songs we wanted to sing. When it came to television, I mean, The Cosby Show was everything to us back then. As kids, we just loved seeing Black people on TV, honestly, because it was so rare that we would see ourselves on television. And whenever we'd have a show that was centered around our lives, it was such a treat for us. But I also love legal shows like Matlock. I loved the idea of this, defense lawyer coming in and righting the wrongs and righting injustice. And I think that really it played to a certain desire for justice in my head. And, I also was very into reading about civil rights heroes. And I think that's all been a through line throughout my life of being very interested in justice and equality and fighting for people who may be wrongly accused or unjustly punished.
And what about films? Was there, especially because you had been so sheltered, was there like a film that you were exposed to when you were living on Lexington Avenue that you were really like, oh, this is life-changing, or that just meant a lot to you?
When I was in high school, the films that were so exciting for us were like the gangster films like New Jack City and Boys in the Hood. We all were watching them. We were all talking about them. They were so important in our lives.
Menace to Society.
Yes, all of those. We loved Coming to America too on the comedy side. Everything Eddie was doing during that time was like must see.
For more information about Black-led brands, products, and my memoir, Thicker Than Water, visit walmart.com/blackandunlimited.
Do you remember having a longing to be a storyteller, to be part of the team of people that brought those stories to life, or did that happen later for you?
That happened later. My goal was to be a musician. Like that's what I wanted more than anything else. And I wanted to sing for people. I wanted to entertain people. And really my interest in stories really came through me being an English major first. So, I'm reading great works by all these great authors, and my concentration was in African American literature and culture. So I'm reading Toni Morrison and James Baldwin and Richard Wright and all these great authors. And then I started having lots of friends who worked in Hollywood and started to understand more about how television and film got made. And then I started getting more interested in helping directors and filmmakers and writers tell their stories and get them out to the world.
If I asked you to write a song that started with Once Upon a Time and was a little bit about Lexington Avenue, do you think you could do it? Could you do like 1 or 2 lines of a song about Lexington Avenue?
I feel like the lyric of Kids starts with Once Upon a Time. Hold on.
That means we're getting a sneak peek of the new album.
Once upon a time we was young and acting stupid. Thought we was in love, still believed in Cupid. Once upon a time we was doing too much. Had our first crush, then we lost touch. Seems like the days fly by in the blink of an eye, and we're grown up just like that. But as much as we try to replay and rewind, it don't go like that. Can't live in the past. Oh no, we ain't kids no more. I done come a long way from the kid next door. Oh, if we can't be kids no more, maybe we could get together like before. Sometimes I wanna go back home. Young and innocent, couldn't do no wrong. Wanna go back home. It's been so long, is it all gone?
Oh my God!
That's a little bit of Kids.
I mean, that could be the theme song for this whole series, John.
So the first verse is about, your first love, and then the second verse is about your old friends, and the chorus is, we ain't kids no more, but maybe we can get together and see each other every once in a while.
Oh, I love that. And it actually starts Once Upon a Time?
Yes.
This season, we're really lucky that we have some extra resourcing that we're able to share with guests to be able to pay it forward to the causes that mean a lot to them. And I was so excited to learn that you have a theater named after you.
Yes.
Will you tell us, where's this money going?
So it's called the John Legend Theater. We refurbished an old theater in my hometown that had kind of fallen apart, and we raised over $500,000 to refurbish the theater, and my hometown decided to name it after me, and it's the John Legend Theater. I love it because it's where kids who are, like I was, who are participating in choir or in talent shows or in school plays and musicals, this is where they'll practice, this is where they'll perform. Every kid who loves the arts needs that kind of place.
That's amazing. Wow, I'm so grateful. Thank you for being so generous.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
I think we're all so grateful that John Legend found his voice. That was such an inspiring conversation. I hope you loved it as much as I did. Please look out for his Audible words and music, and also his double album entitled Legend. Thank you, John. Thank you for sharing your journey and your heart. Please continue to come join us as we walk on the streets that people grew up on. Like and subscribe and all that stuff. And thanks so much. Okay, bye.